Could the clerk bring the next witnesses to the witness table, please? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, gentlemen. I think for the record, could you please state your names and the positions you hold in your organization, starting from Mr. Goh?
My name is Goh Sin Teck. I'm the editor of Liên He Zhao Pao and Liên He Wan Pao.
My name is Warren Fernandez. I'm editor of the Straits Times and the editor-in-chief of our Singapore Press Holdings English, Malay and Tamil media group.
My name is Mohammed Saad Abdul Rahman. I'm the editor of Berita Harian of the Singapore Press Holdings.
Yes.
My name is Walter Fernandez. I'm the editor-in-chief of Mediacorp.
I'm Jamie Ho, Chief Editor, Digital News at Mediacorp.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. The evidence which you'll be giving today before the committee will be taken on oath. If you so desire, you can take an affirmation. The clerk will now administer the oath.
I, Warren Fernandez, swear that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. Please be seated.
I, Jamie Ho,
I, Mohammed Saad Abdul Rahman, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence which I shall give before this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please be seated. Welcome to the public hearing on the Select Committee on Deliberate Online Falsehoods. The focus for today's evidence gathering session is for us to put questions to you. You have taken a solemn obligation to answer our questions truthfully, and I'll now call upon SMS Janiel.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, gentlemen. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for your submissions. What I propose to do is to take you all through the submissions that you've made, perhaps for some points of clarification, allow you to expand upon some of your points if you feel that's necessary. And then I'll have some general questions for all five of you, and then I'll open up to my colleagues to join in and ask some further questions. I would point out that even though I'm going to start, I think, with the Channel News Asia submission, actually both submissions have a lot in common. So actually, if you all agree with each other and you agree with each other's points, that may speed up the proceedings as we go along, and we don't necessarily need to repeat ourselves. But we'll see how things go. So if I could begin with the CNA submission by the senior editors. You have it, I hope, in front of you. But if you look at your third point, your third paragraph under the introduction, you make the point that fundamentally the conflation of these DOFs with the popular and wider use of fake news also threatens the credibility of the mainstream media, ultimately leading to a loss of trust between the mainstream media and the public. You see this as a serious problem, that the existence of these DOFs and that conflation can affect your role that you can play as the mainstream media?
Yes, we do. I think it's quite clear that the threat of DOF and its association with the term fake news has basically been hijacked by many parties to label serious journalism that they disagree with as fake news. And this basically threatens fundamentally what we do and how we tend to inform society accurately. It's an excuse by many parties to rubbish serious journalism, basically.
So would it be fair to say that if we were successful at engaging with the issue of deliberate online falsehoods, one of the effects would be then an increased level of trust in credible journalism?
Hopefully, yes.
Okay. If I could move you to the second page of your submission, where you talk about how you might define a deliberate online falsehood. And you've suggested three minimum criteria. You begin with that the content in question must be proven to be false. And I presume, and you've said some of this in the rest of your paragraph, that you're drawing distinctly a line between commentary and opinion on one hand and a provable fact on the other hand. Is that right?
Yes.
Secondly, you suggested this, of course, must reside online, that implicit in the name deliberate online falsehood. But I think your rest of your paragraph, you are making the point that the characterization of something being online is potentially very broad, referring to different types of technologies, different types of products, platforms, and services, and that any actions we take should be, in a way, platform agnostic. Would
Yes.
that be a characterization that you
Yes,
agree with?
that's accurate.
And thirdly, you've highlighted the issue that we must, of course, deal with things that are circulated deliberately, and that you want to ensure that things that are inadvertent, genuine errors are not inappropriately, harshly punished.
That is correct.
So we have to establish the intent prior to then taking any action. You've gone on to then suggest that in order for a DOF to attract, and I quote, potential regulatory corrective measures, you've suggested 5 objectives that this DOF should have had the intent to address. The first is to influence the democratic processes, compromise national security, undermine the judiciary, affect racial or religious harmony, and lastly, manipulate financial and economic outcomes. Why have you chosen these 5?
We wouldn't suggest that this is a comprehensive list of all the potential objectives, but these to us are some of the key fault lines in Singapore.
And if it was a deliberate online falsehood that did not address a key fault line or an issue of similar impact?
Then a graduated approach might be necessary.
Okay. You move on in your submission to talk about reach. Why do you believe that reach matters? In your point 1 under that paragraph, you've suggested that where an individual or organization with limited reach makes one post on one occasion, it may not necessarily need to be addressed as a DOF. So you're suggesting in your paragraph 2 that there should be thresholds to determine reach and frequency to decide what a DOF is.
Ultimately, this, I think, goes to the core of the issue of what I think the previous panel was talking about in terms of freedom of speech. In that when we do look at metrics, if we do look at measures, that the measures are targeted and specific enough not to provide excuses for people who may have done things accidentally or who may be just participating in a very close chat with another person.
But I'll put it to a weakness of your position. There are 2 weaknesses I would see. One is that it allows some then protection for parties that you've just criticized, who are trying to undermine mainstream media, trying to undermine trust in our organizations and our processes, that they could hide behind the fact that they are much smaller than organizations such as yourselves, and therefore do not need to attract attention. The second weakness then for that position is that even if they are themselves small, a third party can then significantly amplify their deliberate online falsehood to the detriment of all of us.
So in which case, if there were measures targeted, the measures will also look at that third party.
Thank you. If I could move you then to your 5th page. Fundamentally, the key point I want to draw out here is that you believe that whatever body is established should be accountable to Parliament. That you feel that's a necessary precondition for the effective work of such a body.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. If I could move to the SPH team.
Minister, if I could just
Please.
jump in. I agree with quite a lot of what my colleagues have said. I think if you refer to the Edelman Trust Barometer findings, which we've included in our representation, trust levels of the media in Singapore has been consistently high, but it has been on a downward trend, largely because of the conflation between mainstream and social media. And I think that's where it impacts on our credibility. because people have this difficulty distinguishing between fake and real news. And online, you do see a deliberate attempt to have a constant drip feed attacking the mainstream media. And I think there's a clear commercial and political purpose behind that, because it is in their interest to cast a certain doubt about the mainstream media and therefore divert attention and audiences, and with that, revenues to their sites. So there is a clear impact on us.
I'm going to ask you to expand a little bit upon that, Mr. Fernandez. Could you explain to us who you believe the they in what you've just said are? Secondly, expand a bit on what you see is the benefit that they would get out of this. You suggested that it's about revenue, and is that the limit of it? And thirdly, could you explain a little bit about the drip feed phenomenon that you just talked about? I mean, what is being drip fed to us?
Well, it's an attempt to, I think, undermine trust, as you've mentioned. The drip feed comes in constant attacks on the mainstream media, pot shots that are taken at us, questioning our credibility, pointing to delays in information. And I think some of it comes from the different standards that we hold in terms of what we consider to be credible and reliable news. Because we wouldn't put out information which we were uncertain about. We would check and cross-check, and that sometimes takes time. It sometimes takes effort to verify. And we may choose not to put something out because we think the information is dubious, but you may see it happening online. And then aspersions or questions are raised about why we are withholding that information when there's absolutely no intention to withhold information. It's more a process of us going through that checking that's necessary. So I think when I say they, I refer to other sites. I refer to individuals, bloggers who have an interest in undermining the credibility of the mainstream media.
What do you believe is their interest in undermining your work?
Well, as I've mentioned, it's partly to draw attention and audiences to their alternative sites and away from us. So there is a commercial purpose.
A commercial purpose. Thank you. This issue of the professionalism of journalists is a matter I will return to. But if I could maybe take you through your submission from SPH. Your paragraph 2, the first part of that, essentially summarizes what you've just said, that a central tenet of combating such falsehoods is to maintain a strong, trusted, and well-resourced mainstream news media. You believe that that's necessary for us going forward in dealing with deliberate online falsehoods in any shape or form. Similarly, in your paragraph 5, you've suggested some factors to determine how we should address a deliberate online falsehood. And you've suggested that there should be a test of intent, whether the false information is created and spread with malice, with mischief, for the sake of profit, or for other self-serving reasons that display a blatant disregard of truth. And then you've tried to draw the distinction to exclude genuine errors, satire or parody, and where there has been an intent to help, but someone has been misled. Secondly, you've talked about a test of significance. So similarly to the submission from CNA, and you've drawn the factors of public interest, societal harmony, political election results, and public health issues. So largely overlapping, but there are some individual factors on both sides which are slightly different. And again, you've talked about a test of virality or reach, and I draw your attention, also other multiplier channels such as through word of mouth or other offline methods. So the approach in a way needs to be technology, platform, and process agnostic, and dealing with the intent, the impact, and the reach of that falsehood. In your paragraph 9, you've said, the proliferation of fake news in recent times and greater public awareness of its negative consequences has also resulted in greater confidence and reliance in media organizations known for reliable and quality content. That's a little bit at odds with what you've just told us.
No, it's not. If you look at the Edelman findings again, they have found that with the proliferation of fake news, the trust in professional journalists has gone up by 5 percentage points, whereas the trust in social media sites has gone down. And what that says to me is that there is a sense amongst the public that they are looking for people they can rely on, people they trust, people who are credible, to help them make sense of what's going on out there. And I think that's where the challenge comes to us to maintain that trust with the public. And that's why it's so important that that trust is not undermined by other players.
How do you know you have the trust of the public?
Well, the Edelman findings is one form, but I think ultimately the best indicator is a market test. We see people coming to us daily. Millions of readers come to our products, our papers, our websites, and these are paid products. They are paying for that content, and they wouldn't if they didn't believe us. I think some reference was made last week to the readership numbers and the circulation numbers for the Straits Times. And if you combine our print and our digital readership and circulation, they have all generally gone up. And it's often said, loosely that young people don't read the news, but that's not true because about half of our readership is from 18 to 34. So they are reading the news. And I'd also say that what's different beyond the numbers is that these days we don't just have one point of contact with the audience. When the newspaper lands on your doorstep, we are engaging with the audience on their phones, on their desktops, on their tablets, on the radio, multiple points and multiple times throughout the day. So never before has the content that we are putting out been reaching people so many times throughout the day. And I think people wouldn't be turning to us for information if they didn't trust us.
You believe that the behavior of your customers is a best marker of the trust that you have in the public? Yeah. Would Channel News Asia have a similar point of view?
Yes, we would, and it bears out in concrete examples that we've seen when there have been major news incidents. We've seen our traffic go up by as much as 3 to 4 times, which speaks to the fact that when there is a demand for knowledge, a news event that's happening, people do turn to trusted sources such as SPH and ourselves.
And from the Channel News Asia point of view, would you have similar concerns about this drip feed erosion or this deliberate attempt to undermine trust in the mainstream media that
I wouldn't say, of course, in general terms, we would have similar concerns as SPH, precisely because it's become almost fashionable for anyone who disagrees with what they read, whether simply because they don't like it, to label it fake news. And therefore, there is a certain danger in that. But as to whether or not we feel it as strongly as our colleagues on the other side of the table is of course up for debate.
Okay, I just need to remind you, gentlemen, that in order for your agreement or assent to statements made by other members of the panelists to be recorded, I would need you to actually say yes, that our transcriptors unfortunately cannot record the nod of a head.
Noted.
Thank you. Okay, if I could return to SPH paragraph 11. SPH believes in the need to actively build up the population's resistance to falsehoods via promoting media literacy.
That's right.
But are you concerned that there is a limit to how effective media literacy can be to deal with this problem?
I would say it's one of those necessary but not sufficient conditions. And I should say that when we refer to media literacy, which is a term that's been bandied about quite a lot this past week, we are referring to it in the broadest sense of the term. So it's not just 1 or 2 programs that you do in school and check a box. It has to do with giving citizens access to information. So in our submissions, we've made reference to a proposed smart citizen initiative where citizens would have access to information such as our archives, which they can refer to cross-check and verify and get a sense of whether this is true or untrue. We also propose things like a partnership with other partners who can help raise awareness about the kinds of online falsehoods that have been discussed over the past week. And also, there was reference this morning to debates. Last week, for example, we partnered with the Singapore Management University to organize a debate. I think those kinds of forums in our schools helped to prepare people to be discerning and skeptical citizens to be able to tell the difference between real and fake news. All of that, I think, is necessary. It's part of the process. But whether it's going to be enough in itself, I don't think so. It's necessary but not sufficient.
What do you believe is the concern with regard to its insufficiency?
Because a lot of information can be spread very quickly, and people don't always have the information to make a decision on that information. So sometimes biases can set in. So you need other forms of inoculation as well. It's no different from, say, having programs to discourage people from speeding or drink driving. That doesn't mean you don't also have laws. You need both.
CNA, would you have similar views about how media literacy is necessary but not sufficient?
Yes, clearly. I think media literacy on a whole, the population does need to be sensitized to the threat of DOFs, the nature, how they spread, and there hasn't really been a sustained public education of these threats that the nation faces. But in itself, that is insufficient and will take many generations for that knowledge to basically seep in to our DNA.
Could I just jump in at this moment? I think we cannot assume that everyone is so tech savvy, especially the older generation and the Chinese-speaking community. And I think this is the group that we have to pay more attention to them as well.
Sorry, if I may just...
Besides what Mr. Fernandez has mentioned, motivations or some others, maybe revenue, but there are also other reasons why people purvey certain sort of information for whatever it is, activist ideas or whatever. For that, we also need to be very careful because strict ways actually is a judgment call. Now, the other part about this engagement, we do from time to time engage people. This part of media literacy to educate as far as readers, to sometimes go behind the scene to explain to them certain issues. That takes a lot of time, but we are not afraid to do it. We prepared to do it because if only to explain certain things in the context, in the right context of what the issues are. Thank you.
Mr. Goh, may I just follow up on your comment? Are you suggesting that the non-English speaking Singaporean population, it is easier for deliberate online falsehoods to spread amongst them or harder for us to count? You're suggesting that there's a particular challenge for the non-English speaking Singaporean population?
A challenge for them to understand the danger of falsehood, because many of them may be the first time engaging in social media for many of them. And they may not realize the impact, or they may just take it for granted that whatever they see is correct, is all truth. Yeah. And all this, I think, it is important to educate that.
In the language that they're comfortable in?
I'm sure, yes.
If I could direct you to your paragraph 13 of the SPH submission. Towards the end of the paragraph, you make a comment, the rapid diversion of advertising revenues away from content creators could also create the conditions for a fake news industry to thrive. Can you explain that? Why is this? Why does the advertising revenue and the flow of advertising revenue make a difference to how deliberate online falsehoods will spread?
Well, in a sense that the business model for the media has been fundamentally disrupted. So all of our products, our news sites, our print products were dependent largely on print advertising or digital advertising. But increasingly, a lot of that advertising is being mopped up by a few key players. And therefore, you have a disproportionate ability to respond to news developments, including fake news. And therefore, with the sort of commoditization of news, many players can come into into the space. And as a result, you open up the sphere for a lot more content which could be false to emerge on and confuse the public. Our ability to verify and cross-check is a heavily resource-intensive one. It requires tremendous resources and time to be able to sustain the newsroom of our size. If we cannot sustain our news operations, we cannot play the role that we've been playing all these decades and years. And as a result of it, I think societies will be more poorly served, because it does take resources on our part to verify every rumor and every false news, which diverts attention and resources from other important subjects which we could be covering. And therefore, it hampers our ability to do so. And the suggestions also that if we are not covering a certain story which is available online, that we might be doing it for untoward reasons, is in a way could also affect us commercially. So for all those reasons, I think it is important to look at the business case and the business models that underpin what good quality journalism requires.
Would CNA have similar views on this?
I don't think the growth of DOF or its prevalence is tied to revenue models for Channel News Asia in particular. I think our revenue models with SPH are quite different. And I think the actors who are involved in perpetuating DOFs are not doing it with the objective of disrupting our revenues. They have much larger objectives in mind. That may be a byproduct of revenues going to technology companies where DOFs might spread more rapidly, but I don't think it is a direct correlation with the growth and spread of DOFs.
The larger intent is the undermining of trust.
Undermining of trust, national security, any of the major agendas undermining our ethnic harmony.
So if I could perhaps paraphrase Mr. Warren Fernandez's comment then. You are suggesting that the business model in the digital online advertising space has rewarded deliberate online falsehoods, diverted advertising revenue to encourage the spread of deliberate online falsehoods, as a result of which resources from responsible mainstream media are sucked up to combat deliberate online falsehoods. So a vicious circle, a vicious spiral.
Broadly speaking, yes. And also, I think there has been reference in the past few days to a report that was put out by the MIT on how fake news tends to spread further, faster, and deeper than real news. So that makes it easier for people to create fake news, because there is a tendency for that to spread, and that therefore becomes more commercially lucrative for them to do so.
So there's a line in your paragraph 13, the last sentence, which I think sort of sums it up very neatly. This is because the digital supply chain rewards the distributors of content, not the originators, which has serious implications for the sustainability of genuine news. If I could go down to your paragraph 14, you make a point about how newsmakers, not journalists, not the platforms and products, but that newsmakers and advertisers also have a part to play to deal with DOFs in a timely manner. And also the consumers, the audience, so that this is there is no single party that has responsibility in dealing with this. But maybe could you expand a little bit on what you feel are the responsibilities for newsmakers and consumers in terms of dealing with deliberate online falsehoods?
Well, on the part of newsmakers, I would say there is a need to be proactive in countering fake news, to be responsive to developments when they arise, so that we can come out and help clarify quickly to the public. Because in the absence of that, you leave a vacuum, and then the fake news can spread. It also raises questions why we are not reporting or coming up with a version to explain what's going on, so doubts proliferate. I think this applies to all newsmakers, whether you're public entities or private entities. I think there was even a reference to how the Catholic Church needed to do it. So I think it applies to all of it, and it may perhaps especially so on the part of governments. As for users, I think, and consumers of news, I think that healthy skepticism, that questioning before you believe something and before you share something and become a spreader of that news is also quite important. I don't know if my colleagues want to add to it.
Yes, the same goes with us, the same standard. We expect, in order for us to do a more thorough and complete job, we are happy that all stakeholders will work with us to clarify certain things. For example, in the Berita Harian case, we work closely on matters pertaining to religion. we work closely with the Islamic Religious Council. That's where our guidance is. And then we have developed sort of relationship with them. So it's easier for us to navigate things like sensitive issues. And then that's how it has been on for years. And more so in these times of social media. Thank you.
If I could move on then to some of the recommendations in the SPH paper. You've got, between your para 15 and your para 17, you've accept, I think, that while we have existing laws with some scope, and you list out the Sedition Act, the Telecommunications Act, the Protection from Harassment Act, and the class license registration for internet content providers, is it fair for me to say that in the way that you phrased it and what you go on to, that there are gaps in the existing laws that perhaps we need to consider addressing?
Yes, I think we framed it that way.
Yes. And specifically in your paragraph 19, you've suggested that we should consider measures that would require online platforms such as, and not limited to, Facebook, Google, WeChat, WhatsApp, Snapchat, YouTube, and Twitter to operate on a level playing field with mainstream media organizations, especially in terms of taking responsibility for the content they publish and promote. They should be required to act faster when falsehoods spread on their platforms and to disclose the identities of creators of deliberate falsehoods. Why do you feel it's important for them to behave in a way similar to a media organization? They would claim not to be a media organization. They would claim to be platforms. But I would assume, from the way that you phrased your paragraph 19, you are suggesting that we need to hold them up to the same level of responsibility with respect to their content as well as the identities of the content creators.
I think what we're suggesting is that there should be a more level playing field between all players, and these platforms which are putting out information and spreading it quite considerably ought to be held accountable. And if there's deliberate falsehood on their platforms, they should be required to take them down just as we are, and there should be that level playing field.
Any comment from CNA on this issue? Would you agree with that characterization?
I think it's extremely challenging for the tech companies to be regulated as media companies. I think the skill sets that they have in their organizations versus the skill sets that we have in our newsrooms is significantly different. I think expecting, for example, WhatsApp to be able to stop a WhatsApp chat message that is clearly a DOF would be challenging. So I think there is a space for legislation to make them more accountable for the outcomes of their dissemination, but whether they should be regulated in the same way as media companies, I'm not sure.
So there is some commonality between the two positions. You'll accept that some of their behavior impinges upon the space that media companies are working in, but that you all are held to different standards. The media companies and the tech companies are held to different standards.
Yes.
And that gap in the standards has an impact for what we're dealing with here, the ability for deliberate online falsehoods to spread and have an impact on our society.
Yes.
But I think there's some disagreement between the two about what the extent of regulation on a tech company should be. Should it be a regulation that approaches what we do for the media companies, or should it be a regulation that has an outcome that is similar but perhaps to a different process? That's a little bit of a, there's room for disagreement on that.
Yes.
Am I characterizing the conversation so far correctly?
Yes.
Can I add also, I think whatever it is, even the closed groups need to be looked into seriously. Because from the small group, as we heard earlier, it can spread even further, right? If the level of playing field is not the same, then it's quite difficult to close the loop in that sense. So it's something that have to be looked into seriously as well. That's my position.
We are not proposing that the social media or the platforms are being regulated just as like the traditional media. But we are saying that if there's a new legislation on deliberate online falsehood, whatever applies to the mainstream media should also apply to the social media. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. if I could just, the last point from SPH's submission, which is in your conclusion, paragraph 27, I think we have, this sort of sums up your position. A major consequence of any spread of misinformation is a concurrent rise in mistrust. In today's fast-moving, digital-centered world, it is essential to update our legislation and regulatory practices to keep online falsehoods in check before they undermine our institutions, policies, or values. I think we've covered that ground, and I think largely all of you would agree with that sort of position. Please.
No, I just wanted to put in context our recommendation on new laws or regulations. I think there are legitimate concerns amongst our editors and in our newsrooms about any form of new legislation. And I should explain why there are those concerns. Because we feel that there are already quite a number of existing laws which gives the government powers, which, as you have used previously. So any further legislation is something that naturally causes concern in our minds because we have no sight of what shape or form that legislation might entail. And the reason why we believe that you should have a care in applying any new legislation is simply this. The news gathering process is not a neat and tidy one. Information doesn't come to us in a sort of completely nicely packaged form. It often comes to us in bits and pieces, some partial information, and it's incumbent on our journalists and our editors to go out there and check and verify and pull the strands together and interpret and make judgments. And in the process, sometimes you may get the complete picture, sometimes you may get assumptions which may not be entirely correct, and information might be put out which may not be the full picture. And we worry that if your legislation that you're proposing or you have in mind is so broad and so sweeping, it could impinge on our ability to do what we do day to day. So that's where we are concerned about. There's also the possibility of differences of interpretation or differences of opinion, which could then be labeled as deliberate falsehoods, which could have an impact on the willingness or the readiness of members of the public to share information with us. So for those reasons, we have said, please have a care in any new legislation that you propose or you're thinking about. And if you are minded to have new legislation, please focus your energies on the spectrum of fake news, which is really deliberate falsehoods that are being put out. And please focus your energies on ensuring a more level playing field between us and the distributors of content who should be held to account and should be held responsible for the information that they put out and they spread. That's really the context in which we're suggesting that there might be a need for further legislation.
Okay, if I could move on past any further issues with respect to the submissions. If not, I have some general questions. Both submissions talked about a fact-checking body. One was fact-checking council, the other was a fact-checking alliance. But if I could perhaps suggest that there may be common ground, that whatever process around fact-checking is established, that all of you would perhaps agree with some of the statements, that it needs to establish the truth in a way that has some strength or some trust behind it, and that for some of the matters around national security, race, religion, economic and financial issues, public health issues, by definition, that source of truth must be government-backed or state-backed. The most egregious issues, the issues with significant impact on our social fabric, on our national security, on our public health, issues of peace, stability, the facts behind those, if you're going to have a source of truth, it needs to be state-backed. Even if you set up an independent body, where are they going to get their information from? Would it not ultimately need to come from the government?
Broadly speaking, I'd agree with you, but there may be instances where information could be useful from other sources. On public health, for example, you may get professors, doctors, practitioners who have information which is also useful, and it may be better to have a non-government and independent body verifying that information rather than it coming from the government.
I'm not suggesting it needs to exclusively be from the government. I'm suggesting the government needs to be part of the process.
I wouldn't disagree.
We have no disagreement with that.
And if you were going to go down this route of having a fact-checking process, whether it's a council, alliance, or a body, the outcome and the output needs to deal with the speed of spread of the deliberate online falsehoods. That any process that is not able to deal with things that spread in minutes to hours is not going to be effective in this space.
Yes, agree.
So that, yes, yeah.
Yes, agreed that it has to move quickly, and I think we make that point, that this fact-checking body has to be able to move as quickly as the DOFs are spreading.
And if that fact-checking body is not able to move as fast as that the egregious DOFs are spreading, then in a way this approach is useful only for either DOFs that are not spreading quite so fast or do not have that large-scale national security public interest impact. That there is a scale of DOFs, and both submissions have talked about this. At the one end, things which have significant scale, impact, and reach, and then right at the other end, you have satire and parody, and somewhere in between, you have issues that may or may not turn out to be significant later on. And the fact-checking process may be more appropriate for that middle ground, because I presume you wouldn't want to get involved in the stuff that is really satire and parody, and perhaps there isn't the speed or the ability to deal with things that are moving extremely fast.
I agree, but that doesn't preclude having a fact-checking body for other ends of that continuum.
Indeed. So I'm not suggesting it's exclusively one or the other.
Or it could be the case that at a time of emergency, it may be better to take down whatever the post or news first because of national interest. But then there can be a process for whatever platform or the newspaper to go back to that independent body to say that, in fact, whatever we have reported is not fake news.
So the process need not be the same. Just as you have different bodies, you might have a different process depending on the reach, the intent, the impact, and the significance. Yeah.
Sorry if I could just add, it also could be not so black and white. It could be flagged or referred to in different ways. So we've referred you to the cross-check example in France, where media organizations come together and any individual or organization can surface examples of fake news, and organizations would then agree to verify and check and flag instances of fake news as being definitely false or questionable or dubious, and you could have different reactions to that fake news. And I think there is value in that sort of a process, except in the extremist cases that you've talked about where you may need to go to the government for an answer. But for the other ends of the spectrum, a more variegated process is probably also useful.
Anything to add?
I think we are not 100% convinced that at the end of the spectrum where there are issues of national security, that the Fact-Checking Council could not move as quickly as needed to. That we have not seen the way this might be set up, the way it might operate. I'm not ready to rule that out completely, to say that in certain instances you wouldn't go through a fact-checking council or body of that sort.
But you agree that speed is going to be necessary?
Speed is critical in this body's operations. I just haven't seen a setup that's been proposed that would mean that they couldn't move quickly.
I understand. But just to be clear, when we talk about speed, we mean, are you talking about speed of detection, speed of engagement, or speed of action?
Speed of authorizing action.
Okay. So that whatever proposal, in order to deal with egregious and significant deliberate online falsehoods, will need to be able to authorize the relevant action with some degree of speed in order to spread the falsehood from spread.
Yes.
And I think all of you have suggested and agree, I'm sure, even if we have a variety of processes with a variety of thresholds or a variety of bodies, the entire process needs to be accountable to Parliament. That even if you act first and then have some opportunity for recourse and appeal later, the entire process needs to be accountable for Parliament. I think that's come out in the variety of statements. Okay. So can I just ask, just for my understanding and perhaps edification of the public, all of you all have spent some time drawing the distinction between different types of deliberate online falsehoods. You're urging the government or the select committee and whoever is dealing with this to think about falsehoods in different ways depending on intent, upon reach, upon significance. Is there a parallel in how journalists then deal with falsehood? So you talk about the resources that you put into fact-checking, the time that's taken to process, the difficulty with verifying information. So is this something that has a corollary or has a parallel within your professional community, that you deal with the possibility of falsehood differently if that falsehood has an impact on national security versus something which perhaps has less reach, less impact, less significance, and perhaps is put out with a different intent? So do you as a community of professional journalists deal with falsehood in that differentiated way? And that's why you're asking all the rest of us to do it? Or is there some other factor at play here? I'm not sure who wants to.
We deal with falsehoods in a singular fashion. There is a zero tolerance for falsehoods, regardless of whether it has a low impact or a high impact. There are multiple checks within the newsroom to prevent falsehoods from going out. First and foremost, our reach is significant. So on the reach factor, we would basically run afoul of any sort of metric that would be put out there. Second is the issue of trust and credibility of the brand. And if we do want to differentiate ourselves from the other social media players, the other purported news organizations, one-man operations and stuff like that, we have to take a single position on that. So within the newsrooms, we have a very simple philosophy. It's described as ACT, accurate, contextual, and timely, and in that order. So the first hurdle that needs to be cleared before something is published is accuracy.
If I may, I would agree with Walter broadly. All information that we put out, we would want to be as accurate as we possibly can. So we're not cavalier about what we put out. So it would go through the same series of checks and verification and multiple layers of checks through the newsroom. And by the time we put it out, we would hope that it would be correct and accurate, because we do have reputations to maintain, and the credibility and the trust of our readers is critical to us. Having said that, it's also true that we would pay a special attention to content or stories which relate to race or religion or national security, because they are of a different order of significance. So you would get a senior person, a senior editor, going through those stories and reading it extremely carefully, because we know that while we want all our stories to maintain a certain standard, some stories have more of an impact on society. So we would take a special care with those.
I'd just like to add, because we are dealing with this information almost every hour, every minute. So when some of the things come through, it's very difficult to detect whether it's going to cause a greater impact or not. Sometimes information may look very small. But for the same thing, we take the similar approach, similar standard, especially matters relating to race and religion, to make sure that everything is accurate, and we take a step back and take a look. The checking process is rigorous to make sure that this won't go out without being verified or in the full context as it should be. So I think it's a day-to-day process, hour by hour process, and as I said just now, it's difficult to know whether a certain piece of information is going to grow bigger than what it is.
What happens when you make a mistake around this zero tolerance to falsehoods and accuracy?
It's quite clear. When we do make a mistake, there's full transparency in explaining why we made that mistake, being public that we made that mistake, and explaining what the actual truth is and where the error was. So I think that's a key thing that differentiates mainstream media in correcting mistakes that may eventually or unavoidably happen.
So the same applies to us. I mean, we take mistakes, inaccuracies, wrong information that we put out extremely seriously. We would want to check and find out what happened and why. We want to take a remedial action to find out what happened and try to avoid it happening again, because it does impact our credibility. So I think that is what distinguishes us from other players. The sense of angst that is felt in the newsroom when something like that happens is tremendous, because we know that the trust that we have earned with the public is precious and not to be taken lightly at all.
So, gentlemen, I'm going to challenge you a little bit on what you've just said in contrast to what you said in many of the comments prior to this. If you as a community of journalists in your professional behavior have a zero-tolerance approach to inaccuracy and falsehood, that you will, as far as possible, ensure the veracity and truth of what you put out, why should we not all be held to that same standard? Because in much of what you have said prior to this point, forgive me if I'm misunderstanding, you're suggesting, I think, that it's okay for us to not be so scrupulous, to not have a zero-tolerance approach to online falsehoods. But that's not the standard you hold yourselves up to. You hold yourselves up, if I understand what you've just described, to a zero-tolerance approach around falsehood, that you want to, it is your professional responsibility to make sure that what you put out is true and verified. But you have, up until this point, argued that we shouldn't have a zero-tolerance approach to falsehood when it comes to the online space and society in general. Now, that may be a reasonable position, but help me understand why there should be a different set of standards for professional journalists as opposed to everyone else.
I'm not so sure we're saying what you are suggesting we are saying. What our view, I think, is that you should distinguish between the deliberate spread of falsehoods and someone who spreads information quite innocently without any intention to mislead. And our fear is that if you don't make that distinction, you will cause the flow of information to seize up. And people who may have a genuine difference of interpretation about data or information or a different point of view will be cowed or fearful about offering that information. And that would make our jobs much, much more difficult. Our ability to keep our readers and our citizens informed a lot more difficult. And that's why we're saying, please have a care. We're not saying that you should be cavalier about the kind of information that's spread. We're just saying that there is a potential downside if the legislation that you come up with is too broad and too sweeping, and that's why we've put it in that context.
Yes, I think I'd agree with Warren. It's really a question of not just falsehoods. We're talking about DOFs, where it has to meet the criteria that we've spelled out in our submission of it being deliberate, the intent being there. The target of this DOF is not coffee and cancer, I think I heard you guys talking about earlier. It is really targeting a fundamental part of what is Singapore's DNA. And if it meets those criteria, I think you're well within your powers to go at 100%. But there are going to be many other DOFs which don't meet that criteria, and that is where the graduation, I think, that we're talking about comes into play.
If I could perhaps try and explain it this way and see if you agree with me, you're not suggesting that it's a good thing to have low-level deliberate online falsehoods that don't meet the test, but you just want to make sure that whatever tools and means we use to address falsehoods in general don't have any negative consequences on the ability to have an informed public debate around issues and for you to do your job as journalists.
Yes.
Yes, I would agree, and I would say that's not only a concern of us as journalists, I would say it's a concern of many people in the public as well.
I agree. Thank you. Last point, we have not spoken much about this, but do you have views about advertising? Your platforms, and we've spoken a lot about journalism and how journalists do their work and what the role they play in society, but your platforms, your products carry advertising. And you talked about the advertising revenue, but is there an issue with being accountable for paid advertising that may address some of the issues about deliberate falsehoods here with respect to perhaps what is happening in the online space?
I would say so because it goes to the issue of trust and credibility as well. We take advertising, but we don't allow advertisers to influence our news judgment. And we certainly, if we do run sponsored content, but we clearly mark those as sponsored so that we are upfront and honest with our readers. That's not always the case with some online players where content is maybe sponsored and not clearly marked and labeled. And I think that is dishonest and they should be called out.
We have the same practices when it comes to content that's sponsored or which has an advertiser influence on it. It is clearly marked out. And that, I think, is useful for the audience to know the origin of this content and who has had a hand in crafting this piece of content.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Chia?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see and hear all of you in person. I want to ask some clarification. Could you share with us what is your view or definition of the freedom of the press and journalistic integrity?
I mean, we've referred to quality journalism, which I think is broadly in answer to your question. It is the pursuit of information which is accurate, which informs the public, which is purposeful, which helps our readers make sense of what's going on in the world, helps them interpret and come to decisions that will be critical to their lives, whether it's voting, whether it's decisions on how to spend their money, how to bring up their children. That, to me, is the role and the critical function of the press.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Fernandez?
Yes, I think really journalism in Singapore is about helping Singaporeans to make decisions, to make sense of their lives. That is the role that we really play. And I think we have to basically give them as much information that can help them to make decisions.
Thank you. I asked these questions in relation to the trust issue. Of course, you know, the trust in mainstream media is still high, but not as high as it used to be. And we all acknowledge that there had been erosion, not necessarily only through the perpetration of online falsehoods, although, again, over the last few days, we've heard witnesses and read submissions that have shared how DOS and other state players have also engaged in actions to erode trust in mainstream media. But beyond that, on the ground also there would have been some erosion of trust independently of deliberate online falsehoods. The erosion of trust is important because it has to be addressed if we are talking about tackling deliberate falsehoods, whether online or otherwise. And in reporting, there are always, well, maybe I oversimplify, but there are two aspects. One, of course, is in the objectivity of the writing and the reporting, the nuances, of course, and secondly, in relation to what is reported and what is not reported. That requires also some element of editorial and journalistic judgment. So therefore, there is a perception in certain quarters that the mainstream press is pro-ruling party or pro-government. And of course, in some other quarters, they say, oh, you know, mainstream media has now swung the other way. Whichever way you look at it, I think there is an important issue that has to be addressed. So I think we need, if we're going to be talking about how we regulate or not regulate anymore mainstream media as opposed to online media, we need to tackle the issue of trust and these perceptions. So perhaps you want to share your views?
I would agree with you broadly. I think if I go back again to the Edelman Trust Barometer, I mean, the findings have shown that trust in the media has declined in 22 out of the 28 countries they surveyed, and that includes Singapore. And one of the key reasons they cite for that decline in trust is because of the conflation between mainstream media and social media. So it has pulled all of it down as a result. And so we are caught up in that, obviously. And the second point I'd make is the one I made about the constant drip feed, where there is an attempt to shape perceptions of the mainstream media for the reasons I've cited. Now, to the broader point you made about whether the mainstream media is pro one party or the other, or partisan in that sense, I think over the last 5, 10 years, we have tried extremely hard to be fair, balanced, and objective, because we see our role as not being to play up one group or the other, or one party or the other. It's really to give our readers as much information as they can to make decisions for themselves. And if we were partisan or biased, I think we would be clearly called out on the social media. So it would backfire and it would affect our credibility. So we wouldn't be inclined to do that. And I don't think it does anybody any service if we tried to do it. It would be a disservice to our readers. It would be a disservice to our journalists, and ultimately, I think, a disservice to Singapore.
Thank you.
Can I add?
Thank you.
I think for our readers, majority of them go to us for certain kind of information. About the question whether we are pro this or pro that, I think as a journalist editors, almost like day to day, we get requests, demand for all levels of people from various sections, even advertisers, to put up their certain information and all that. What we do is we got to make a judgment call whether this is of value to the readers or otherwise. So it's a process that we have to go through and deal with almost every day in the newsroom. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think trust has changed over time. Before the social media advent, there were far fewer brands, news sources, and these were much larger, more dominant, and enjoyed a higher degree of trust. The significant fragmentation of the audience has left them with a significantly wider choice, and the echo bubbles that have been built by the algorithms have basically created a system where people want news that basically resonates with their own personal view, the view of their friends whom they hang out with. And we are judged now quite differently by the expectations of an audience that has moved on significantly, and we have to fight to earn that trust on a daily basis now. In that sort of an environment and against that sort of landscape, it does us no justice to want to be pro-A or pro-B in that sense. Our fundamental premise is we have to provide accurate, contextual, and timely information to the audiences and allow them to make up their mind. As Warren pointed out, there is a certain drip feed type of campaign to undermine the credibility and the trust in the mainstream media. But ultimately, when we see moments of crisis, we see people coming back to the mainstream media. And I think that speaks to the trust there is within our organizations and the trust that Singaporeans hold up the two mainstream media companies with.
Thank you for the clarification. My second point relates to your proposal for your point on self-regulation of the online platforms as well as the content distributors. Yesterday, we heard from the technology companies, and in the face of evidence to the contrary, they fought valiantly for self-regulation. They also replied in relation to couple of examples that we gave to show how they had been slow to respond. One of the responses was, this guy has an axe to grind. So what I want to hear from you is this, right? You're proposing regulation. You're saying, okay, you've got to impose these regulations on them and make them accountable. How would you reply to an argument that you're doing this in your self-interest to kill off the competition and to get rid of people who provide alternative channels for freedom of expression?
We are asking for a more level playing field. We are not asking you to tip the playing field in our favor. And we've referred to legislation in other places like Germany and elsewhere, where it has been the conclusion of their parliaments and governments that you needed to have powers to require them to take down information, because in the absence of those powers, you wouldn't be able to do so. Our own experience is trying to get some answers on the algorithm, for example. We have absolutely no idea what goes into that algorithm. There's absolutely no transparency on how the algorithm is formed or changed. And so we're helpless. We have to just play in the space in the dark. And if you don't have the powers to compel them to reveal that sort of information, it's not going to happen.
Thank you.
I think this debate on regulation of the tech companies is long overdue. We have labored under a long time myth that you can't regulate internet companies because they are global, they're complex, they're powerful. But I think that this is completely wrong. I think if tech companies put their mind to it, not to mention the engineering strengths that they have within their companies, I am convinced they could detect.
Which they have been telling us they have, right?
Which
Yes.
I don't think we're seeing the results of. I'm seeing a lot of pledges of. I'm convinced they could detect and deter such negative online behavior quite easily. Ultimately, I mean, fake news shouldn't be anything different from our email spam. I mean, the early days of the internet, we all thought that spam was going to overwhelm us. But frankly, right now, it's a nuisance, but it's fixable. And I think fake news is in that same category. I think they need to move beyond just peddling meaningful social interactions and a relationship with their advertisers. And they have to take responsibility for the public outcomes of what their platforms do. And I think that's where the legislation that we're speaking to comes from. And like Warren, I agree, we're looking for a level playing field. It is not a question of tilting it in our favor.
Okay.
It's not so much of how they define themselves, whether they define themselves as a tech company or a media company. It is more important how the consumer see them. If the consumer go to them because they see it as a source of information, then I think it is only logical to ask them to behave in a certain way, in a more responsible way.
Thank you. So my final point comes back again to the issue of freedom of the press, as well as, because that really relates to the issue of trust that the public will have in you. We've all heard, and I think we all agree, that there is no such thing as an absolute freedom. Likewise, for freedom of speech, I think you were here just now, and Professor Theo also shared with us very informatively on freedom of speech. So again, many allegations about the press in Singapore being gagged, being directed to do or say things in certain ways. I want to hear your views really about what is freedom of the press and what would constitute legitimate constraints on those freedoms. Thank you.
I think we hold the freedom of the press quite dear to our hearts because we are journalists. We want information to get out there. We want the ability to inform our readers, and we would be concerned about any attempts to constrain that, quite legitimately. But the freedom is not absolute because there are other freedoms which also need to be safeguarded. And I think that freedom needs to be contextual to our particular situation and our particular society. So, for example, we would be mindful of sensitivities regarding race and religion, for example, knowing that this is the nature of our society, knowing that the communities we serve expect of us to uphold that societal harmony. So we would not be willing or prepared to, say, publish the cartoons of the Prophet, for example. It would be very clear in our minds that that would be contrary to the interests of the communities we purport to serve. Yes. So the freedom in that situation, we would exercise our own judgment on how it should apply.
Thank you.
It's the same for, if I may, the same. So we are very careful. So long as, the freedom comes with responsibility. So even among us colleagues, some things we are not sure. We check against each other whether these things are sensitive or will cause any untoward impact. I think, basically.
Okay. Thank you. Chairman?
Ms. Rahayu?
I'd like to direct these questions to Mr. Mohammad Saad in Malay.
Okay, if you want to do it in Malay, as soon as the light lights up, that means you stop for the interpreter to interpret. All right?
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, please proceed.
Cik Mohammad Saad, Terima kasih kerana sudi hadir untuk memberi keterangan. Saya ada beberapa soalan yang mungkin telah dijelaskan tadi tapi mungkin boleh diberikan perincian sedikit dalam bahasa Melayu. Saya rasa kita sedia maklum tentang cabaran yang dihadapi oleh media tradisional dalam menyampaikan informasi yang sahih dan bermanfaat kepada orang ramai. Mungkin telah disebut tadi ada saingan dengan landasan media sosial dan ada juga berita sensasi yang mungkin lebih popular dan ini perlu diseimbangkan dengan berita yang lebih penting dan mungkin tidak begitu menarik. Boleh Encik Saad berkongsi sedikit tentang cabaran ini dalam konteks masyarakat Melayu Islam kita dan apakah prinsip atau teras berita harian secara khususnya dalam menyaring informasi yang sesuai untuk orang ramai untuk menyampaikan berita yang tepat dan padat dan juga menepati citarasa umum.
Terima kasih.
Please proceed.
I think we are fully aware that of the challenges faced by traditional media in conveying, in presenting truthful information that is of benefit to the public. There is competition from media social platforms. There are sensational news which are more popular, but there is also a need to balance that with more important news which may be less attractive. So could Mr. Saad share with us on these challenges in the context of the Malay Muslim society here? And what are the principles or the fundamentals that Berita Harian uphold in filtering information that is suitable for the public, in conveying news that is accurate, concise, but also that meets the taste of the public?
Thank you. Mr. Saad, please proceed.
Terima kasih. Bagi Berita Harian, sejak sekian lama, malah sejak 60 tahun, kita telah wujud dan membina satu platform berita yang dekat dengan masyarakat dan dipercayai dengan masyarakat. Ini sesuatu yang kami ingin lindungi. Tetapi cabarannya makin berat sejak beberapa tahun lalu, tentunya kerana adanya social media dan pembaca kita juga boleh mendapatkan sumber berita daripada pelbagai sumber. Namun ia tidak melemahkan kita. Kita tahu apa yang kita perlu lakukan untuk berkhidmat kepada masyarakat kita, memenuhi keperluan mereka. Berkenaan sama ada sesuatu berita itu sensasi atau tidak, sebagai media berita, kita harus menyajikan deretan berita berbagai-bagai. Walaupun berita sensasi mungkin boleh dengan mudah mendapat pembaca atau menarik ramai, tetapi kita meneliti setiap berita.
Mr. Saad, could you hold on for a while for the interpreter to interpret?
Thank you. Berita Harian for a long time, for the last 60 years, has been a news platform, has built a news platform that is close to the people, that is trusted by the people. And this is something that we want to protect. But it has been increasingly challenging for us in the past few years with the rising of social media, and our readers are also able to get news from various sources. However, this has not disheartened us, because we know what we need to do to serve the public. We need to understand their need. As for whether news is sensational or not, as news media, we should be presenting a range of news. Even though it might be sensational, it could still be gain readership and attract the readership. So we should look at different the news.
I think just to clarify,
Sure.
apa yang saya nyatakan ialah walaupun berita sensasi itu sesuatu yang dapat menarik bilangan pembaca yang ramai mungkin, tetapi walaupun demikian itu bukan satu kriteria untuk kita mengeluarkan berita yang disebut berita sensasi. Bukan kerana itu, tetapi kita kena tengok apakah berita itu berguna, factual dan seimbang.
Just to clarify what I said earlier about sensational news, even though the sensational news may draw readership, wide readership, but we still need to, that is not the criteria for us to produce sensational news, what we call sensational news. I think we have to see whether the news is useful, factual, and it also has to be balanced.
Satu perkara penting yang kita menjadi prinsip kita lah dalam sebagai akhbar untuk masyarakat minoriti adalah apakah yang terbaik untuk masyarakat kita. Kita melihatnya dari segala sudut kerana dari masa ke masa berita atau maklumat yang berkaitan dengan kaum dan agama adalah sesuatu yang paling sensitif. Jadi dari sudut ini kita amat berhati-hati dan kita bekerjasama dengan beberapa pihak lain. Contohnya dalam isu-isu berkaitan keagamaan, kita bekerjasama dengan Majlis Ugama Islam Singapura untuk memberikan maklumat yang tepat dan lengkap dan tidak mislead atau mempesongkan apa yang ada.
Thank you. Interpreter, please.
So, one important aspect of what one of our important principles as a newspaper for a minority community is to produce what is the best for the people. We look at different angles, all angles, because from time to time we have news or information that is racial or religious oriented, that maybe those are very sensitive. And so in this respect, we have to be very careful. We take great care and we cooperate with different parties on such matters, especially where it relates to religious matters. We work together with Islamic Religious Council so as to provide news that is accurate, complete, and is not misleading.
Saad, please proceed.
Ya, terima
Terima kasih. Saya ada soalan susulan. Bukankah dengan cara sebegini dilihat semacam berita harian itu menjadi meletakkan satu censorship terhadap apa bahan bacaan yang diberikan atau disampaikan oleh masyarakat. Dan dalam hal ini mungkin baik untuk Encik Saad berikan sedikit perincian tentang bagaimana informasi yang disampaikan tu diperiksa ataupun fact checking yang dilakukan. Mungkin ini dapat memberikan pemahaman kepada orang ramai kenapa perlu adanya sedikit saringan. Adakah prosesnya sama juga untuk setiap jenis berita tentang isu-isu yang berkaitan dengan agama dan hal ehwal semasa, dan berbeza pendekatannya dengan informasi yang mungkin lebih ringan seperti hiburan. Dan juga adakah caranya berbeza untuk sumber-sumber yang berbeza?
Does it not appear as if Berita Harian in this case is censoring yourself? You are imposing self-censorship on yourself. And in this respect, could you explain how this process of filtering or censoring the news is done by Berita Harian? How is the fact-checking that you are doing? Is the process the same for all kinds of news, including current affairs or light reading materials such as entertainment news, and for news from various sources?
Kami berpegang teguh kepada prinsip kebebasan maklumat, tetapi dengan tanggungjawab. Tanggungjawab itu berlandaskan keseimbangan maklumat, konteks dalam mana maklumat itu disebarkan, dan juga ketepatan. Dan juga satu sudut yang agak penting juga adalah sama ada sesuatu maklumat itu akan membawa kepada impak yang besar, terutama dalam masyarakat kita. Semua juga kita kena pastikan. Satu contoh,
We uphold the principle of, we adhere strongly to the principle of freedom of information with responsibility. The responsibility is on the basis of balance of information, the context of the information where it is being disseminated, and also accuracy. And one important aspect is also whether the information will have a greater impact, especially in our society.
Berkenaan dari segi pemeriksaan kepada kandungan yang kita keluarkan, semua piawan tu standardnya ada serupa, sama ada ia bercorak gambar, bercorak kandungan, walaupun berita kecil, malah hiburan, malah ruangan sastra. Ruangan sastra kita di Berita Harian adalah antara yang paling popular. Namun, walaupun dalam ruangan itu, kita memeriksa dengan pelbagai cara, beberapa editor melihat segala sudut. Namun, kesemua yang pembaca kita semuanya bersikap tanggungjawab. Mereka tahu wadah yang digunakan dan mereka tahu proses yang ada, yang tiada yang diselitkan, jarang sekali diselitkan sesuatu yang bercorak, yang boleh mengapi-apikan perkauman, keagamaan. Namun demikian, kita tetap melakukannya sebagai sebahagian daripada DNA kita.
Thank you.
In regard to fact-checking of our content, we hold the same standard, whether it relates to pictures or content, or whether it's light material, even entertainment, and even it goes to literary material. Our literary section in Berita Harian is one of the most popular sections, but even in the literary section, we have checks in many ways. We look at various angles, and And even the readers take responsibility for that. They make sure that there is no sensational content and there is nothing racial or sensitive in the material. They are responsible about it.
Soalan saya yang terakhir, dalam keterangan yang diberikan oleh Dr. Ilmi Nikmat minggu lalu, beliau ada menyebut tentang kepalsuan khusus yang boleh disebarkan kepada golongan tertentu melalui bahasa ibunda, dan ini telah disentuh sedikit oleh Encik Goh tadi. Apakah pandangan Encik Saad tentang hal ini? Adakah cara-cara tertentu untuk menangani hal ini selain menterjemahkan sahaja informasi yang sedia ada, mungkin tentang bagaimana untuk memeriksa kepalsuan?
Saya
Good.
In the evidence given by Dr. Elmin Nikmat last week, he spoke about specific falsehoods that are spread to certain groups through the mother tongue, which was also referred to by Mr. Goh earlier. What is your view about this? Are there certain means of handling this other than just translating the information, the existing information, and to fact-check the falsehoods?
Saya amat setuju dengan pandangan yang diberikan oleh Dr. Nikmat. Inilah satu yang menjadi keprihatinan saya juga apabila sesuatu maklumat itu atau bahasa ibunda digunakan untuk menyebarkan sesuatu maklumat. Kerana bahasa ibunda itu adalah sesuatu yang kadang-kadang kata-katanya bercorak emotif yang boleh digunakan atau dieksploitasikan untuk mempengaruhi masyarakat kita.
I fully agree with what Dr. Nikmat said. This is also my concern, where news is spread through the mother tongue. Because mother tongue is also, it can be emotive and it can also be exploited to influence opinion.
Bukan saja dari segi bahasa ibunda, mungkin dalam bahasa lain juga. Saya ingin menyebut satu contoh, umpamanya perkataan jihad. Perkataan jihad yang disalahgunakan boleh memberikan pelbagai kesan. Bertahun-tahun lamanya, kita sebagai media dan juga badan-badan seperti MUIS, Pergas dan RRG menggunakan banyak sumber untuk mendidik masyarakat kita erti sebenar jihad. Dan pendidikan ini masih berterusan untuk menerangkan erti kata jihad sebenar. Ini satu contoh bagaimana perkataan saja boleh, satu perkataan saja kalau disalah ertikan boleh mendatangkan impak yang besar.
And this is also in other languages as well. And I can give the example of the word jihad. The word jihad has been misused to, and the way it's been misused, it can lead to different impacts. And for many years, we in the media, MUIS, organizations like Pergas, the RRIG, have been relying on various means to educate the people as to the meaning of jihad, the true meaning of jihad. And this education is continuing, it goes on, and to make sure that the public understands the real meaning. And this is an example of how just one word, if it's misunderstood or misinterpreted, can have a great impact.
Hari sekali ada satu perbincangan semalam mengenai sama ada daripada salah sebuah syarikat media, sama ada mereka ada tim yang memahami bahasa. Saya tidak pasti, walaupun adanya demikian, adakah ia menyeluruh, kerana penggunaan bahasa adalah sesuatu yang yang satu boleh digunakan, satu senjata yang boleh digunakan. Jadi di berita harian satu yang kami amat teliti dengan berat, walaupun ia satu tugas besar. Saya harap apa pun langkah-langkah seterusnya yang dipikirkan oleh pihak jawatankuasa melihat daripada sudut platform media saluran dalam pelbagai bahasa juga. Semoga ia dapat meliputi keadaan-keadaan ini.
So finally, there was a discussion yesterday about whether a media company can have a way of understanding this aspect from the aspect of language. I'm not sure whether we can have a comprehensive approach to this, because language is, its use can be used like a weapon. So in Britarian, we look at this with great care, and we see this as a duty. And so I think whatever steps the Select Committee may consider, I hope that you will look at it from the aspects of different languages.
Terima kasih.
Ms. Sun?
Sorry, Chairman, if I may just jump in support of my colleague Saad. I can't speak in Malay, but I just wanted to make a general point which addresses both the questions that have been asked by Ms. Rahayu and Ms. Chair. I think you need to make an important distinction between the exercising of judgment by editors and censorship or self-censorship. Before we publish anything, we would want to assure ourselves that the content we're putting out is not libelous, it's not unfair, it's not biased. And that process of making that judgment, I don't think is censorship. It's us exercising responsibility. And it's not something that we do in any imperious sort of way. We recognize it's a duty, and we make judgment calls, and we take constant feedback from many sources, from the newsmakers, from readers, from organizations, to help us inform those judgments. And I think that's a critical role that a responsible media organization would play. It relates to the earlier debate that you had about the marketplace of ideas. If you are going to have a meaningful exchange and debate, I think you need informed decisions of that sort, because it's not a matter of every view being put out there and then you have a slugfest and you expect sweetness and light to emerge. I don't think that you can assume that in today's age.
Okay, Ms. Sun, proceed, please.
Yes, Chairman, I would like to direct my questions to Mr. Goh Sin Teck. And if you do not mind, if I could do that in Chinese, please.
Sure, same rules. Light on, stop. Go.
辛迪先生，基于您对华文假新闻的认识，您是否认为相对于其他语言散布的这个假新闻，以中文、以华文散布的假新闻是否有一些不同的特点？而这如何影响了传统媒体如报业控股？如何去应对这些假新闻，去纠正他们，然后呈现一个准确如实的这个报道？谢谢。
I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Goh. Based on your experience and your understanding so far on this online fake news in Chinese, do you think there are any differences in the fake news in Chinese from those in the other languages? And for the SPH, what are the means you have to make sure that all these false news are corrected and the correct version or the actual facts be reflected in your report to your readers?
谢谢您的提问。首先我想要说的是，假新闻它其实是不分语文的，它影响到我们所有做媒体的人所以不管你是英文的、华文的、马来文的，我想大家都基本上共同面对同样的问题。
Well, thank you for your question. What I want to say is that as far as fake news is concerned, it doesn't matter from what language it came from. In fact, all fake news will affect all of us, whether it's in English or in Malay or in Chinese.
不，华文作为一个媒介语，当然在华文的有关华文的这个假新闻，或者说用华文来传的这个假新闻，它也可能会有一些特色啊，我可能可以进一步的说明。
Well, as far as Chinese being used as a medium of reporting, and of course, I think there are certain characteristics in this fake news in Chinese.
首先，因为它的受众的关系啊，所以你会发现到，用华文来传的一些假信息，当然就跟华文的受众是比较密切关系的。所以，比方说，我们常会收到的是关于个人的健康的保健的问题啊，这是其一。
And of course, because of the reach and the audience that we have for our Chinese papers, and there are frequent complaints or queries that we receive from readers. For example, the news regarding the health and the healthcare materials.
什么可以吃？我指的是说什么可以吃，什么不可以吃啊？有很多都是没有科学根据的啊，但是大家都很愿意传。
For example, what can be eaten, what cannot be eaten, and many of them have no scientific background or backing to whatever they say, but people just simply spread it.
当然有一些是跟我们生活比较有直接关系的，比方说前阵子就有人传啊，是用华文传的，当然也有用英文传的，说我们的这个 NTUC Fair Price 在卖这个塑胶米啊，这个当然也引起了我们一些的关注。
And of course, there are also matters that concern our daily lives. For example, recently there was some news, some in Chinese and some in English, that our NTUC Fair Price is selling a plastic rice. And this is something that we are very concerned with.
当然有一些就可能比较敏感了。
And of course, some other news could be more sensitive.
我记得在去年，当新加坡跟中国双边关系有一些波折的时候，也有一些假信息出来了啊。我不是说这些假信息是来自官方的，不是啊，但是我们发现也有一些假信息出来了。
Like for example, last year when we have some difficulties in our relationship with China, and there was some fake news that was being propagated. And I wouldn't say that these were from official sources, but there were in fact some fake news.
我们可以看到，甚至包括新加坡的华人，甚至华商，他们都会通过他们的微信或者是 WhatsApp 在传这样的信息啊。我一个比较深刻的印象就是在那段时间，关于这个在泰国的这个克拉运河的这个新闻，就忽然间在那个时候很热，很多人在传。为什么在那个时候，这个消息又跑出来？关于克拉运河的这个新闻传了很多年，但是在那个时候就有一些，我想是有一些有心的人，在炒作这个新闻。
And during that time, there were a lot of people in Singapore, especially the businessmen. They were spreading this news through their WeChat or their WhatsApp, and during this period of time, suddenly there was this mention about this proposed canal in Thailand, and I do not know. Sorry?
The Kraft Canal.
The Kraft Canal, yes. And I do not know why this subject was brought up all of a sudden.
我只能够猜想说，在这个时候，当时的假新闻里面就有讲到说，有一些中国的商家跟泰国的政府之间签了一些 MOU， 想要发展这个运河。而我想背后他们在传的就可能有一些目的吧。
So I can only guess that maybe some people were saying that the Chinese side or the Chinese businessmen had signed some MOU with the Thai counterparts. And I think there are some people who have some ulterior motive in spreading such news.
而当中也可能是有这个商业目的的，因为特别是在中国啊，他们的这个微信的这个媒体上，他们是会直接或者是间接的奖励那些转发率很高的那些帖子。
And I believe there may be some commercial consideration in this, because in China, in WeChat, any news that there's a lot of spread or a lot of spreading would receive some sort of a reward from them.
所以这些是我们现在每天可能都会面对的一些问题啊。当然我们作为一个新闻媒体，我们怎样确保我们所发送的这个新闻都是真实的？我想我们的做法大概跟我的刚才同僚们所说的同事们所说的大概没有两样啊。就是我们对这个我们所报道的新闻的真实性，我们是非常认真看待的。
And of course, every day we would face with all sorts of problems around this news, whether they are true or partially true that is being spread around. But I think as far as we are concerned, we deal with it the same way as my colleagues have said. We are very serious in our reporting, and we check all the facts before we report them.
我可能先再次打住，不晓得。
Thank you.
好的，我有另外一个问题哈。我们看到昨天的听证会，出席的都是来自美国的科技公司，可是就好像刚才你所说的，就是以中文散布的假新闻，他们可能是在不一样的一些平台，其他的平台去散布。那您觉得我们应该如何去应付在美国以外的其他的平台的这种假新闻的散布呢？
Well, in yesterday's hearing, we heard about all these issues arising from tech calls from US and other countries. And so as far as Chinese is concerned, if there are fake news in Chinese, I think we would have to deal with it in a different platform. Is there any different platform that we can use to deal with all this fake news in Chinese?
我想您提出了一个非常重要的一点哦，就是当我们把整个的关注力只是放在 Facebook 跟Twitter 跟 Instagram 这方面，我们可能忽略了可能还有其他的，我能够说是漏洞嘛哦，这个东西我想是也需要照顾到的。
You have raised a very important point, because if we focus only on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, I think we probably neglected some other platforms or some gap that we have to look into.
但是具体说要怎么管制他们，我没有具体的建议。
As to how we could specifically control them, I have no suggestion to make.
我还有另外一道题哈，就是刚才你也提到，就是说有一些年长的人士，他们可能会用例如面部的这个 WhatsApp 啦，就是他们其实是用一种封闭式的这种群聊，对吗？那对于这些小众的封闭式的群聊，您觉得就是说传统媒体在这方面可以有什么样的作用，可以扮演什么样的角色去纠正在这些小群众当中散布的这个假新闻？
Well, we know that among some of our senior citizens, they will use some close type of group chat, like WhatsApp or anything, and then they will spread the news among themselves. So what can our traditional media do to help them, especially the senior citizens, to rectify the news that they had spread and to point out to them what are the true picture?
我想首先就是刚才我们在通过英文的时候，我们在讨论的哦，就是说这个 media literacy 的这个东西的重要性哦。我想特别是对我们的老一辈的国人来说，真的有一些人，我们可能觉得说社交媒体已经存在那么多年了啊，但是对老一辈的国人来说，可能他们才刚刚接触到社交媒体，不懂得怎么去利用它，去善用它，包括说很多人就真的是以为说。传给我的东西应该都是真的，我就帮忙也传给我的朋友们。
Well, as we had discussed just now in English, the traditional media plays a very important part in pointing out some of the fake news that is being spread in the social media. Of course, some people may say that the social media has already been in existence for such a long time. But for many of our senior citizens, They are probably using it just recently, or they are just newcomers to this game, and sometimes they do not know how to differentiate whether the news they have received are true or false. So they believe that, well, since I heard this or since somebody told me this, then it must be true, and I will just spread it to my friends, and so that they will also be enlightened.
所以第一就是我想公众教育是重要的，而我想在这一方面媒体是可以扮演一个角色的，一个重要的角色。
So public education is very important. So I think for this, the traditional media can play a very important role.
另外就是我们可以怎样帮忙的去纠正一些假信息啊？不过我们会碰到一些难题啊。第一，如果他们是通过 WhatsApp 或者是微信，它的那个传播度可能没有像Facebook 那么高，所以变成我的这个同事的这个耳目真的要删得很广啊，因为他需要知道说大家在传的是什么啊。所以这第一点就是有些在传的假信息，我们老实说新闻是不一定知道啊。
And for our senior citizens who are using maybe the WeChat or WhatsApp, it is a very small pool of people who are involved, unlike Facebook, which is so widespread. So we have to open our eyes, and because sometimes my friends or even the newsroom may not know what is being spread in the WhatsApp or in the small groups.
第二就是有些人又假设报社呢会去求证所有的假信息，但是我们的人力其实是有限的啊。有那么多的假信息在传播中，我们只能够选择一些我们觉得比较重要的。但是对一些人来说，当然他们知道说，对有一种讲法了啊，就是说报纸登的东西应该就是对的啊。这个我们很高兴，读者对我们有这样子高的这种信任度啊。但是还有很多东西是我们自己没有办法去求证的。它并不代表说它就是真的，但是这个是因为我们人手的关系，我们不可能求证每一个新闻啊。那么他们就会有一种错觉，说报纸既然没有出来否认说这个信息是假的，那么它应该就是真的。那我们就担心这样子的一种假设会造成一些不好的后果。
Of course, as the traditional media or the main media, we have a responsibility to clarify some of the facts that is being spread in the social media. But then because of our limited resources, we are not able to check into each and every news that is in the social media. And sometimes we have to be selective, and we would only rectify some of the news which are of concern to the general public or the interests of the general public, or something which is of sensitive or more greater importance. And it is not possible for us to check into everything. However, many people will say that, well, since there are news that's reported in the newspaper, it must be true. So we'd like to thank our readers for the trust in us. But sometimes this would have also some problem, because some readers may feel that news that are not being pointed out as false or not true in our newspaper must be true. So sometimes, due to limit in the resources, we may not be able to rectify everything. And certain things that we did not rectify, our readers will say, well, since you did not say it's not true, then it must be true.
It may have some degree of truth, not that it would be the whole truth. 另外，所以这个就回到刚才我们所讨论的啊，说大家都要有一个角色要扮演，我们扮演去求证的角色，但是其他的人也要帮我们去证实信息是真的还是假的。有时候是政府部门，有时候是可能是私人的企业界的公司等等啊，大家都有这个角色要扮演，尽快的让真相出来啊。
And as we said, that everyone will have a role to play. Of course, for us, we have an important role to verify whether the news that's being spread is true or correct. But sometimes we also need verification from other quarters, like, for example, the government departments or even from the private sector companies. So as soon as they found out that there was such a false news or false information, they should come out and clarify it as soon as possible.
或者是如果它是真的新闻的时候，他也应该赶快出来证实这个新闻是真的。
And on the other hand, if such news are found to be true, then the government department or the private company should also come out and say that these are in fact true. You can believe.
我想举一个例子，如果你们允许我的话，大概1个多星期，3月8号我记得很清楚哦。我3月8号的晚上，我们就接到了一个大家在传的一个 WhatsApp 哦，那个 WhatsApp 里面就在讲说，这个它的内容大概是这样子，就是说我的一个朋友我的一个朋友的女儿在 SGH 当医生，现在 SGH 有了一个病人吃了澳洲来的这个蜜瓜，结果中了 Listeria， 所以新加坡已经有了这样子的一个例子了。那是在晚上的时候，我们收到这样子的一个信息。
Now, let me give you an example. I remember very clearly, it was in the evening of the 8th of March. There was this news on WhatsApp.
A message,
a message on WhatsApp saying that somebody's friend's daughter is a doctor in SGH, and they have found out that there's a patient who took a rock melon from Australia, and is now being affected.
当天我记得是在10点多的时候，我们要不要发这个新闻？我们在想，发这个新闻如果后来证实它是一个假信息的话，它会怎样带来了一种公众的恐慌？
So that was at about 10 p.m. So we were deciding whether or not we should report this in our newspaper. But then we have no means to check whether it is true or not. If it turned out to be a falsehood, then it will probably cause a panic among the people.
所以我们向有关当局查证。不过在那一个晚上，我们做了一个决定，在没有得到证实的时候，我们不会报道这则新闻。
So that evening, we checked with the authorities, and we came to a decision that pending confirmation of the news, we will not report it in our papers.
24小时之后，也就是9月9号，也大概是10点多的时候，我们终于有了一个证实，说这个其实是不真实的。有一个 SGH 有一个病人得到了 Listeria， 但是他跟这个蜜瓜没有关系。
And on the 9th, at about 10 p.m., we had the confirmation from the SGH that indeed they had a patient who had this attack of a Listeria, but it had nothing to do with the rock melon.
谢谢。
刚才您提到就是说，不是每一个你所收到的有可能的假新闻，你都会有资源去核对啊。所以在您所了解到的，就是可能需要您做一点的判断了。您觉得有几% 的这种的假新闻，其实我们的这个传统媒体是没有这个资源去核对这方面的事实的。
Well, you just mentioned that you may not have enough resources to check through all the fake news. And can you maybe give an estimation as to how many % of this fake news you will be able to check through with the resources that you have?
我还真没有很难给你一个这样子一个百分比，因为我不知道在外面的假信息到底有多少。我只能够说，特别是关于那些医药的那些，我也不敢说完全的假信息，可能里面有真有假啊。那些东西我们记者真的是没有办法去核实的。
Well, it would not be possible for me to give you a percentage because it is very difficult for us to know how many fake news or how much false information there are that are being circulated in the social media, especially in the medical side, because some certain news could be partially true, some may be totally false, and our journalists may not have the resources to check through all this.
我只能够说，跟公众利益有关的，我们都尽可能拨出我们的资源去求证。
I can only say that if the matters concerns public interest, then we would pool our resources and make every effort to check accuracy of such reports.
好的。
谢谢。
Mr. Sia Kamping?
Gentlemen, good afternoon. Just one question which I would like to ask both CNA and SPH. I think there is broad agreement that combating DOS, time is of the essence. For both organizations, you have proposed a fact-checking alliance or council, as you call it. I wanted to ask, the effectiveness of such fact-checking bodies is I guess, debatable because time is of the essence, and I wonder whether the owners of responsibility to do more fact-checking, shouldn't this be something that all content producers, as well as content carriers, shouldn't this be uppermost on their minds and something that they should put even more efforts to address it in the first instance? I would like your comments to this.
Thank you, sir. I think 100%, that would be the main approach that we would take, and that's what we've always done. The key thing, as Mr. Janiel said as well earlier, that on many occasions, the state or the government could be one of the key arbiters of what is truth or what is not truth in these particular instances. So when we do need to fact check and when we do need to verify, I think what's crucial then would be for the government in these instances to be able to work as quickly as possible with us, with the media, to fact check and then to put out the correct information as quickly as possible.
I would agree with you broadly that speed is of the essence, and the onus is on the content creators and content distributors to take responsibility for fact-checking, and we would do as much as we can on our part. The value or the benefit of having a partnership or alliance of media organizations and other partners, in the case of the French example, I think there was some value in it because there was the ability for media players to collaborate, to work together and cross-check on whether they were going to put out that information. So in a sense, you took away that competitive instinct to try to get the information out first. So from what I understand from my French counterparts in the French media, because they were able to say, look, we've got this information about what's going on in one political candidate and it's dubious. We are going to fact check and we will not put it out until we've verified, and they all agreed to do it, therefore they could all do it. But in the absence of that agreement, the competitive instinct to want to get it out there quickly would be considerable. So there is value in that ability for media organizations to work and collaborate together. And in the absence of that, it would be very difficult for Walter and myself to agree on who's going to hold what.
And that independent body could also play a part when it is post-publication. Because we do not know right now how this new legislation is going to take its form and its shape. Let's say if we were to put out a story, which through the process, we think that it is true, it is not a fake news, we publish it. But someone, not necessarily the government, someone come and say, okay, it is fake news, and wanted us to put it down. If we were to take it down, is there an avenue for us to appeal? Because then our reputation, our credibility would be then in question. Oh, this newspaper or this TV just published fake news and then was told to take it down. Is there an avenue for us to appeal and someone to say that, oh, in fact, what you have published is true and it's not a fake news? We would like to have such a mechanism.
So yeah, I thank you for your clarifications. But I guess it also doesn't mean that this need to be responsible is sort of delegated to this alliance or council, and that I think we are in broad agreement on that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, if there are no more further questions, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming here and sharing your views. We do appreciate that. We'll be sending you a transcript of today's proceedings. If there are any mistakes or corrections to be made, please correct them and send the transcripts back to us. Once again, thank you very much.